you for the opportunity to come and talk to everybody tonight. All hear me? Yeah. I suppose I should start by apologising. Some of you might have actually seen this talk before, but don't be too worried because it's been a bit of a change and a few additions and things as well. Windows here are a legacy from my uncle Antony Stretton. Some of you have already mentioned to me tonight that they remember Stretton Nurseries just down the road. My bloodline goes directly back through Antony's father, my grandfather, John Weston, his father Lionel, and his father Samuel. Without those three doctors, then I wouldn't be here. My dad was a GP and didn't go down the surgery line, but the three doctors, between them, did about 100 years. I'm settling in, you'll be all right. And doing 100 years, I'm pretty confident that they qualify for the Dynasty tag. Of the three, Samuel, Lionel and John, Lionel was by far the most significant of the three doctors and the one about whom we know most. So I'll be able to tell you a bit more about him than either his father or his son. Before I start talking about the doctors themselves, I'll finish off with information about some things to come. First, perhaps I should tell you a little bit about myself. If I'd been a medic then, perhaps could have worked it out from what I've already said, 3 surgeons, 1 GP, I'd have been a 5th generation doctor. My father wasn't that keen to be a doctor, and thankfully when I came to my career, he didn't force me to go down in a particular road, said do what you like. So I ended up in environmental science and ended up working for Welsh Water, where I actually went into preventive medicine because I'd made sure 3 million people didn't get typhoid every day. The family is very large. Samuel was one of 10 children and Lionel was one of 15. And here I am at the bottom, 3 doctors highlighted in red. When my uncle Antony died in 2010, I inherited a large amount of documentation which he assembled from the family. Previous to that, I hadn't had any interest in the family history. These boxes which I inherited had just a random collection of documents, certificates, photographs, and all sorts of things. What to do with them? Well, several years on from that, I can now tell you they're all safely stored in the archive in Worcestershire County Council in the Hive as part of their historical archive. What I didn't want to do is just surrender these and give them away, so I actually spent 2 years digitising all the documents, which actual fact has proved to be really beneficial because when I come to do the research today, I can just look at it on the computer rather than trying to wait through a load of paper. When I was sorting through the documents, my interest in family history really was piqued by this newspaper article which I came across. This was published on the 21st of February 1943 in the Sunday Dispatch, a national newspaper, a week after Lionel had died. At Kidderminster Hospital, Lionel had pioneered the use of tincture of iodine for sterilising the skin, which was of international importance. We'll come back to that a little bit later, but I think any of you who've had iodine applied to the skin really empathise with the headline of that man who made the world say, oh! What really piqued my interest in that article, they spoke of Lionel as being of a similar importance to medical history as Joseph Lister. I guess most of you in the room will know Joseph Lister, but who had heard of Lionel Stretton at that stage? Largely unknown in medical history. So, catalysed by that, I felt a strong responsibility to try and remedy the issue. As we see during my talk, myself and Antony's executives have found a number of initiatives which allowing us to promote the story. This is the objective, is to try and get the name out there so that people have heard of Lionel. And the first opportunity arose through thanks to my father. He died in 1999, but thankfully he retained a carbon copy of this manuscript of Lionel's memoirs, which he wrote around about early 1940s. He failed to get these published, but thankfully, as I say, my father kept them. When my father died, my brother took over them. And having been piqued by the interest in the article, I thought, right, let's see if we can get this published. It was entitled 56 Years a Surgeon, a bit of the recollections and reflections, a bit of a mouthful. When he tried to get it published, it wasn't for want of trying. With the manuscript, there were a number of rejection letters, this one from Heinemann's. And it said in there, while it's a very interesting production and has much historical value, it would be more interesting 50 years hence than now. And they returned the document. Anyway, I had the opportunity now with the manuscript to hand, and I was able to start on my quest to promote his legacy. To cut some story short, I published a book in 2012, renamed it Memoirs of the Iodine Surgeon, which I thought was a bit more relative. And the only thing I had to change, although it had been written a long time ago, I didn't like Z's on the words, so I changed the Z's to S's, but that's all the changes I made. I also added a number of appendices in the book of relevant texts. For example, a 1909 article in the British Medical Journal, which I'll refer to later, in which he told the world about the success of tincture of iodine. So I added things like that. Heinemann's observation came up a bit short, however. It took 72 years, not 50, to be interesting enough to come to print. The book's available at the back for discounted price of £10 tonight if you want to read. Okay, so having published the book, we needed to launch it, and this was launched in 2012 in the town hall here in Kidderminster, fronted by Richard Taylor, who's sadly no longer with us. This was the first of several initiatives that I and the executors of Antony's estate, Jim Quinn and Eunice Roberts, have driven to promote the three doctors' stories, and we'll be able to see a few more of those. Also, at that book launch was launched Dr. Stretton, I presume. Now, this book has interesting relevance tonight, written by Kidderminster's local historian, Nigel Gilbert, who might be here tonight but is unable to be here. This tells the story of the three doctors. Nigel did a huge amount of research to investigate their stories. And it was commissioned by the executors, like Antony's executors, to basically tell a story and inform the designers of the windows in creating the designs. So that book was also launched at the book launch by Richard Taylor. Available to buy as well, if you want, at the end of life. Alongside publishing the book, a third initiative that I took was to build a website telling the story of the doctors. And this is accessible with much of the family archive material, which I told you are archived. That's available in this website if you want to have a look at it. Lots of photographs, documents, all sorts of interesting stuff. This slip here, you see that these are available at night. Give you the website if you want to take one of these at the end of the evening. Okay, so in Antony's will, he also not only did he finance the windows here, but the remnants of his legacy established the John Weston Stretton of Kidderminster Charitable Trust to fund medical students going through Cambridge and St Bartholomew's hospitals, both institutions which the Stretton doctors had trained at. And the charity was set up again thanks to the hard work of Antony's executors, and that was established in 2013, being the fourth initiative of things to promote the reputation. Cambridge and St Bartholomew's, we have struggled in the early days to try and get students to know about the bursaries which we were able to provide, but through word of mouth and activities, we've managed to get the word out there much more. But the next initiative that came was the development of the three-counted medical school in Worcester University. So this has recently started, and we managed to get the Charity Commission to agree to extending the scope of the charity to provide funding for some of the students going through there. I'm pleased to say the Dean is here tonight. Professor Sandra Nicholson, founding Dean of the Three Counties Medical School, is here tonight. Thank you, Sandra. So I think we hope making a difference there. Okay, back to the windows. So the book, Dr. Stretton, I presume, complete, we were able to move forward with the church window project, and we invited some design competition, and this was won in 2015 by Michael Stokes Design to install 3 sets of windows in the church. And this being the 5th initiative in promoting the doctors. A purpose-made triptych to the 3 windows here, and I think we'll all agree that they fit, they look very good. Not with the sun shining today. What's significant, I think, is that there was an option to put them in one of several churches in Kidderminster, but this was chosen, and particularly good because it overlooks the hospital. A nice connection there. So the windows were installed in the second half of 2015, and facing south, they look lovely as the sun streams, and Laura's already mentioned watching people change colour here. We've put some floodlights out there, which gives you a little bit of idea, but this is probably the best we can do. Please come back and have a look at them when the sun shines if you haven't seen them already. So the windows were blessed, as Laura told us, by the Right Reverend John Inch almost 10 years ago to the day. This booklet was produced. It's 36 pages long. It tells a bit about the story of the doctors. It tells the interpretation, how the designers interpreted the book. Dr. Stretton, I presume, to design the windows. And they're free. There's plenty at the back if you'd like to pick one up as you go out today. Okay, my next and our 6th opportunity to promote the family story came in the form of an exhibition at the Museum of Carpet, funded again by the charity. So material from both the recently published books, my archive of material, provided the basis for an exhibition, and it was entitled The Century Surgeons. This was hosted in the museum the first half of 2015, designed by Sue Hetherington of Shawna Designs. I've recently heard of the sad closure of the museum, and can't really believe that that's happening, but that's perhaps another story. If you missed the exhibition back then, all isn't lost, because we took the opportunity to do a virtual tour of it. So if you look on the website, you can find that virtual tour is available there to walk around. Okay, so a little bit of a background there. So let's tell you a bit about the doctors themselves now, starting with some evidence of their work in Kidderminster, which I unearthed during my research into their story. Whilst I was working with Adrian Gregson, who's the archivist for Worcestershire County Council, to secure our material at the Hive, we came across a wealth of old material saved from the hospital when it closed. Thankfully, somebody had the foresight to collect all that material. This particular document is the Infirmary Daybook, and it covers a period from 1872 to 1902. And it runs for over 100 pages. It's got many handwritten entries by both Samuel and Lionel, which is a bit spooky for me to see, these signed entries by forebears. It's got several numerous fascinating entries, as you might imagine. I'll just give you a taste of these 4. On the 24th of September 1875, maybe go back a bit further, Samuel is sufficiently aggrieved to record, the bread shown to me is not fit for the patient's use. And on the 23rd of May 1888, we learn that an inpatient named Henry Stafford, having misconducted himself and disobeyed the orders of a nurse, has this day been discharged for the same. Couldn't see the Shuttles headline if that happened today. 3rd on October the 12th, 1890, Lionel records, I find that it is the custom to keep the post-mortem instruments in the operating room, which is most improper. Provision for keeping them in the mortuary ought to be made immediately. flourish of his signature, which you can see there, suggests that he wouldn't have moved. And the last of these fascinating little examples, on the 9th of May 1896, Lionel was still clearly not amused, writing, "A doubtful object of charity. Mary May, daughter of the landlord of the Mitre Oak Inn, attends as an outpatient with a note from Mr. Harvey." The response in red reads, "Too poor to be able to pay." In those days, you needed, in order to take advantage of the charitable services in the infirmary, you needed a note from somebody who could afford to provide it for you. In an initiative to promote development of medical skills in the locality, in 1893, Samuel and Lionel established the Kidderminster Medical Society, which is still in existence today. This is their website, and is thought to be the longest established such body in existence. In his book, written in the early 1940s, Lionel records, "In 1893, the Kidderminster Medical Society was formed, with my father as its first president and myself as its first secretary. The society still continues its work and has done an enormous amount of good. It has fostered friendly relations between its members and by its scientific meetings, held 3 or 4 times a year. It tends to improve the character of the work of the profession in the district. At these meetings, papers on medical or surgical subjects are read, cases are described, and specimens shown." Several of Lionel's papers presented at these meetings form the basis for sections of his book, covering matters such as mistakes of the profession, alarming experiences, legal experiences, fashions, medical and other. Lionel had an opinion on everything. If you read his book, you'll find some entertaining stories in relation to that. Technology in the day was less high-tech, and the Kidderminster Medical Society recorded in some ways activities in a minute book, which still exists, and it's actually in the education centre in the hospital over the road. This is the original Kidderminster Medical Society book. It also includes in that book a code of medical etiquette, including the requirement that no member should lower the dignity of the profession by deriving pecuniary benefit from the sale of any secret remedy. Snake oil. Okay, let me tell you about the individuals now, the background, the medical history of the town there. So, while it's no surprise I didn't know either Samuel or Lionel personally, despite them both celebrating their golden wedding anniversaries and living to good ages. Samuel was 87, Lionel 83. That's good for my genes. It's particularly great that I have happy childhood memories of his home, Lee Grange, at the top of Beauty Hill, and staying there with my grandmother. I have no significant memories of my grandfather John, who died in 1952, aged only 64, when I was just 2 years old. In working with historical material, however, especially having scanned hundreds of photos and personal documents, I feel I know them really well and love to be able to go back in time and read them all. So I think I've got probably enough qualification to stand before you tonight and tell you a little bit about them all, and give you a flavour now of their lives, characters and achievements. Starting with my great-grandfather Samuel. We don't know much about his early days, other than he was born in Leicester in 1832 to parents William Weston and Jane. In his memoirs, Lionel records his grandfather, Samuel's father, with these words: "I never heard of his doing any work, but he was a justice of the peace and he used to go down to the town every morning at the loft and sat on the bench. He impressed upon me the importance of homely virtues of neatness, punctuality, and the regular payment of accounts." Must be where I get it from. He also liked to drink port, believing that once opened, the bottle should be consumed the same day. Samuel clearly had some artistic skills, and these are from his student days, the sketchbook from his student days. When he qualified in Bart's Hospital in 1853, the Crimean War was in full swing, and he went out there as a surgeon from 1855 to story has it that Samuel actually worked while he was at Bart's hospital training. He worked with his likened Brunel on the design of the prefabricated field hospital that Brunel was working on and shipped out to the Crimea. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to prove that, but I'd love to have that connection. What we do know, one particular experience, is whilst in the Crimea, Samuel's recorded as having emulated Lord Byron by swimming the Hellespont and back in his spare time. We know this by reference to the event in the book Memories of 80 Years by John Beddoe, which quotes, "About that time too, I suppose it was, that two of our comrades performed the Leander Byron feat of swimming the Hellespont from Abydos to Sestos and back. They were Barber, an athletic Swabian from the Black Forest, and Stretton, still living at Droitwich, a well-made but delicate-looking blonde who once went on leave for a week to ASOS, sleeping of course in native houses and returning with 300 flea bites on one of his hands." Okay, so returning from the Crimea in 1856, after his stint in the Crimea, Samuel bought number 27 Church Street, and the associated medical practice based there, he bought it from Dr. Thomas Thurston. Married a year later to Kate Birch, the daughter of a Leicester surgeon, himself one of 10 children. Samuel proceeded to have 15 children, 3 of whom didn't survive early childhood, but curiously, only 2 of whom were girls, Gertrude and Katie. So clearly a huge family Samuel had on top of his workload, and it probably proved a little bit too much. So to reduce this, he gave 5 of his boys £100 each and told them to go to the other side of the world and make a new life in New Zealand. At least one of the children was only 16 when he went. A report from a shuttle in 1892 recorded that sons Francis and Philip were heading off to New Zealand to join their 3 brothers already there. It also notes that the eldest had been there for 5 or 6 years and was in the possession of 2,000 acres of land. Another had a store and was a postmaster. Harry, who left Kidderminster in 1883, worked on a farm and is clearly he's almost certainly the one on the right here. As he writes an article in the shuttle in 1889 and records that he had an accident with an axe. So lumberjack, not very good. So not only did Samuel have his private practice, but in 1857 he was appointed honorary surgeon of the infirmary, providing medical services at the workhouse. He was also concerned with the poor living conditions this brought him into contact with, and it was unsatisfactory sewage living conditions, drinking water services. He was quite engaged in that sort of social aspect of life in the town. The result of that, I think, was conflicted with local politicians and industrialists, which was inevitable, something Lionel would also experience much of in his career. Improvements to the infirmary were required, and Samuel played a huge part in raising funds and building the new Mill Street Infirmary. So in 1871, you can obviously still see this magnificent building, although it's been converted to apartments, so no longer providing medical services. Samuel made a good living from his private practice. With a salaried role as a medical officer of the workhouse, he was thus able to give his services free of charge at the infirmary. This bust of Samuel, which is over the road in the education centre in the hospital. I can find no records as to the commissioning of this, but I suspect from the timing it was in sort of recognition of his work to build the infirmary. As we will see, all 3 doctors had quite an inventive, innovative, creative side. And this started with Samuel inventing and patenting the Stretton funeral beer. I'm never quite sure about this. A surgeon promoting a tool for the dead. I wondered if there might be a conflict of interest there. One of these is still in the ownership of the local Harris. And in fact, it was used by Antony at his funeral in Rock Church in 2010. In the Crimea, Samuel was undoubtedly influenced by Florence Nightingale and her pioneering approach to nursing. And he was instrumental in developing nurse training at the hospital to be carried on by Lionel, who saw first-class training school for nurses status being awarded to the hospital in 1922. Samuel and Kate celebrated their golden wedding anniversary at a large party in the town hall on the 30th of April 1907. This is an invitation card. And this quite a large family gathering of the actual event in 1907 in the town hall. Samuel and Kate are buried in Trupley churchyard, apparently choosing their last resting place for no other reason than that they liked the view from the site. Can't fault it really. And this was a visit from some of us, five descendants of the family back in 2018, when we went to tidy up the grave. Okay, that's Samuel. Let's have a look now at John Lionel, always known as Lionel. So as we've seen here, Lionel recorded anecdotes and aspects of his life in his book, so we know an awful lot more about him. Born in 1862, he records an early interest in matters medical, accompanying his father on house and hospital visits before he was 10 years old. He performed his first operation when he was just 11. In his book he records, "A wheelwright carried on his trade near our house, and my brothers and I were constantly in his yard. I fear we must often delay and annoyed him, but he was very good-natured and never complained to our father about us. One day he said to me, 'Well, young Sawbones, do you think you could pull out a tooth for me?' Even then I was cautious enough to ask him to open his mouth so that I could examine the tooth. It was a right upper molar just beginning to loosen. I agreed to undertake the operation. I rushed home and secured an old pair of forceps that my father had relegated to the tool basket. And armed with these I returned. The old man sat on the log in his yard and I extracted the tooth. I rather fancy I failed to obtain any fee. And that did not interest me in those days. When my father found out about this, he related the story to many of his friends, with the result that I had several extractions to perform for which I received gratuities. My most important patient was my father himself. He afterwards explained he allowed me to operate because he knew I should stop if he ordered me to do so. Should I? I remember he groaned and I pulled out the tooth." Lionel was clearly very practical, as we've just seen, but not a very good student. He recalls again from his book, "I went to a boarding school when I was 9 years old, but I was never well there and had to spend most of my time in the sick room. Consequently, I was brought home to attend the King Charles I school, Kidderminster, usually called a grammar school. I was then 10 years old. I had a distaste for lessons and had always evaded them by every means I could think of, so I naturally found myself much behind my fellow pupils of the same age. I never did any work that I could avoid at school. I spent all my available time in the playground and had sufficient brains to be able to hold my own in school by learning my lessons on the way home. So I managed to escape punishment. Classics I abhorred, mathematics I revelled in. I always felt a grievance against the headmaster. I protested to him against being asked to commit poetry to memory. I did not care whether the way was long or the wind was cold. It mattered nothing to me. I told the headmaster that I was quite willing to do double the amount of mathematics, natural philosophy, or anything of that kind, but I did not want to waste my time in learning poetry. He would not listen. I maintain that one of the great faults of education in this kind of cast iron system with its rules applied to all alike. For a master to refuse to listen to a boy who has sufficient intelligence and initiative to make such a reasonable request seems to me inexcusable. You may not be surprised to learn that his results were not very promising. His father clearly wanted him to pursue a medical career, so again from his book, I left school in 1876 not having passed any qualifying examination. I was then sent to a coach in Birmingham to be prepared for the preliminary examination of the Royal College of Surgeons, an examination that has since been given up. My coach was a classical scholar, a member of the medical profession, and a kind of recluse. He prided himself on the fact, hard to say this, that no woman had been in his study for 15 years. I went there every day by train and used to take books with me, which I studied on the journey there and back. I had only a short time for preparation, but I passed the examination in March 1877. In April 1877, I was apprenticed to my father, and this was the beginning of my professional training. Lionel put huge importance on the apprenticeship system, of the opinion that it was the best start for a trainee doctor. In 1878, his father took him up to Bart's Hospital to continue his professional training. Looking forward to participating in sports for some relaxation, he soon realised that as he was a bit behind, he had a lot of work to do, and that sports would be a distraction. So he sent all his kit back home and knuckled down to qualify. In 1880, he took his Royal College of Surgeons exam, failed, having misread the question and given a very good answer but the wrong one. To add to his misfortune at this time, Lionel then contracted diphtheria and scarlet fever. He was in a coma for 5 days. This event is recalled in Samuel's letter printed in the British Medical Journal in July 1881. Sir, 2 months ago, I was summoned to town to find a medical student, my son, in great danger, with diphtheric throat, and feeling that his life could only be saved by immediate removal from his lodgings to hospital care, I cast about for a proper conveyance. Various messengers were sent to different owners of the same. At last one was found, willing to undertake the removal a distance under a mile. He would not show his vehicle or promise it before a deposit of 10 shillings, £50 a day, was made. On its arrival, I was in dismay. The landlady and the whole square deeply shocked at the sight of the conveyance. I can only describe it as a cross between a hearse and a dirty linen cart, painted black and with funereal side glass, a black horse with dismal harness, and a driver of the most woeful aspect, also indeed black. It was surely enough to put the finish to any sensitive patient, dangerously ill as my son then was. Surely in these days the metropolis will not long delay this much needed proper ambulance provision. I'm yours faithfully, Lionel Stretton. But despite losing 4 months while recovering from this infection, he passed his Royal College of Surgeons exams in October 1881, and he was appointed junior anaesthetist at Bath. The following summer he was appointed as house surgeon and resident midwifery assistant. His future in London looked well sorted. Then, October 1882, he received a telegram from home telling him that his father was seriously ill. If he didn't return to Kidderminster to help his father, it was likely that Samuel would die. So clearly he had no choice. So he resigned his position in Bart's Hospital and returned to Kidderminster. Lionel then moved into 27 Church Street, which was to be both his family home and private practice for 56 years. As we saw earlier, Samuel bought the property and the private practice from one Thomas Thursfield in 1856. And by strange coincidence, many years later, it reverted to the Thursfield family, now in the business of soliciting, which should be law probably. Since it's actually since been sold now, it's converted into flats. Seems to be the story, with the hospital into flats and now 27 into flats. I found a few in the boxes. I found a few old photos in the archive. This one of the surgery operating theatre in number 27, and this one of the dining room. It's a bit sad, this picture. There are 2 portraits there, one of Lionel and one of Samuel, and I don't know where they are. If anybody knows, please let me know. I think they're long since gone. So in 1884, Lionel married Lucy Emma Horton, clearly learned from the two generations before them and practiced some serious family planning. I was grateful for this formal family photo from the contents of the book boxes, and you might recognise it as the front page from the book, Memoirs of the Ideal Surgeon. The eldest of their tribe, Rosa, trained in London as a dispenser. She actually worked for her father for a while, and this is a picture of her work in the dispensary in number 27. There's little doubt that she would have loved to have followed her father in the profession, but it wasn't the time when women went into that profession, unfortunately. This is her certificate confirming her qualification as an assistant of the Society of Apothecaries at London, confirming her ability in the compounding and dispensing of medicines. So that was Rosa. The middle was Samuel. Samuel, the middle child, proved to be the black sheep of the family. Before the war, First World War, was a manager in a carpet factory locally. He struck up, best described as a non-marital relationship with a loom worker. With inevitable results. So a legitimate child was on its way. Lionel, being the architect in Victoria, was not amused and packed the girl off to New York, out of the way. In actual fact, he must have reneged on that because she did come back and give birth in this country. That's a whole other story which we won't be going into tonight. So returning from the First World War, he suffered from what we would now call PTSD. And in 1920, married Lionel's matron, Anne McFarlane, probably an arrangement by Lionel to try and look after Samuel. Youngest of the three, John. He fulfilled Lionel's hopes of following in the medical tradition, and we'll learn more about him later. Lionel tells of numerous anecdotes and opines on many of life's issues in his book. I've got time to touch only the surface of these. Few examples. He recalls instances of accidents with cars and horses, dealing with a drunken patient armed with a revolver whom the local policeman refused to engage with. He visited Robert Koch in Germany, but the train he was on had crashed. Lionel was left on the side of the track looking after injured passengers, and while the train disappeared into the distance. He tells of sacking house surgeons for inappropriate behaviour with nurses. He tells of sacking of nurses due to drunkenness and drug taking, dodgy horse dealings. He was persuaded by his brother, Edward Albert, who had a garage business in Cheltenham, to buy the first car in town. He actually had to have 3 cars at any given time so that one would be working. And his chauffeur, Harry Teal, managing those for him. In actual fact, they were so unreliable in one case that at one stage he had to go back to horses to make sure that he could get about the patch. He recalls running penny farthing through town in a frock coat. This was recreated in 2015 as part of the Century of Surgeons exhibition, from where this picture comes. He was a counsellor for a time in Kidderminster until the frustration of dealing with all the politicians and the politics of it all drove him not to do it anymore. But during that time he was investigating the condition of sewers and the water system by going down and around suspended by ropes. Lionel had been in a coma previously, saw that when he was training in London, and he had another similar experience. In 1904, he almost died again when he contracted anthrax, almost certainly from one of his patients, who no doubt caught it from the fleeces used in the carpet manufacturing business, which is a known risk. He was unconscious for 5 days again, but back in work within 6 weeks. With the stern stuff, obviously. As a surgeon, Lionel was responsible for much of the administrative management of the hospital. Despite that, he recalls he carried out over 40,000 operations. Following in his father's creative footsteps, however, aseptic hospital furniture, these sort of trolleys with no tight bends and corners to harm bugs. That was his design, and probably pretty much the same as you can see today. He invented a portable operating table, and not forgetting an improved adjustable commode. He also published a series of ambulance lectures in 1889, but we come to his most important development, and that was the pioneering of the introduction of tincture of iodine for sterilising the skin. Surgery prior to this, preparation for surgery involved normally shaving the body, scrubbing the skin with carbonic acid. As you can imagine, it was not very conducive to good skin condition, and it actually not very good at controlling bacterial infections either. I think quite a lot of people died as a result of that not very effective preparation and infection control, rather than the actual problem which they were having surgery for. People had tried iodine before, but it was used too strong. Lionel's development was to dilute it and to produce tincture of iodine, and revolutionised the surgical process. It was not only was it effective, he developed it through a series of experiments in Kidderminster Hospital, where he was measuring the infections and the success of it. He published his findings in the British Medical Journal in 1909. It was a very effective treatment, but also, of course, it had the advantage of it staining the skin, so you could see where it had been applied, so there was no confusion there. As I presented his findings in 1909 in the British Medical Journal. He might make patients say, oh, I had an electrician in the house the other day, and he just had an operation on his finger, and they put a bandage embedded with iodine in it. It's still used today. But undoubtedly it had a huge effect on the success of operations. And I often say that many of us here today might not be here were it not for his invention, because that sterilisation process might have saved one of our forebears who wouldn't otherwise be here to have had us. I mentioned Lionel's administrative responsibilities earlier, but I can't move on without mentioning his key role in fundraising the building of the children's extension to Mill Street Infirmary. Getting money for building and running the hospital was a constant battle, and Lionel didn't have the NHS administrators to do this for him. So whilst I was researching the family story, I came across this film of the Duke of York opening the extension to the Mill Street Hospital in 21st of July 1926. It was a bit spooky to see my great-grandfather suddenly walking onto the screen. Look out for the moustache, that's the key. The Duke of York. Yeah. So Lionel kept working almost till the end. He was interviewed by in the shuttle in 1942, only a year before he died. This is the article, reprinted the article. The shuttle also recalls there were proposals for Lionel to be knighted, but this never came to anything, and I suspect probably because he might have upset a few decision makers in the town over the years. Okay, moving on from Lionel to John. John was born in 1888. Like his grandfather, we don't have a lot of information about his early days. He had his medical training at Cambridge, where he was a keen sportsman. Then he went on to Bath to qualify as an MRCS and an RCP in 1913. So after a similar story really to somebody's short stint as a house surgeon there, war broke out and he volunteered for the Royal Army Medical Corps. He served throughout the war as a captain. After the war, John joined his father in family practice, and he became highly regarded as a skillful surgeon, particularly in trauma operations, working both at Kidderminster here and in the Dudley Guest Hospital. In 1923, John married Mary Smelly, and they had 3 boys, my father being the eldest, and the one to carry on the medical tradition as GP after a stint in the RAF during the Second World War. To be honest, I was ever grateful that the surnames were not reversed. John was a keen photographer, and he was usually behind the lens, but I found one family picture of them all. John clearly had a sense of humour, though, as demonstrated by this little film that I found. Okay, so John was carrying on inventing things in his family tradition. He pioneered the use of radium treatment locally in 1929. He invented tube forceps in this invention here. But his most significant thing was developing a new system for treating inguinal and femoral hernias using a silk net reinforcing mesh. This work he was doing in 1942. His wife Mary, my grandmother, knitted, or should I be knotted, these at home. And then John used them in the operating theatre. Thankfully, he recorded in this paper, which he didn't actually publish, it never got to be published, but he records in there these inserts for boils for 20 minutes before they went into the body, which is fine. I believe it still forms the basis for hernia treatments today. In his spare time, John put a lot of energy for the scouting movement, and he was district commissioner for 10 years up to his death. Some accounts of the scouting involved borrowing a flatbed lorry from a local carpet factory, loading up the tents and equipment, with the boys sitting on top and riding to camp. And invented health and safety in those days, obviously. Next slide is a sad one. John's death was very dramatic. He just addressed a group of nurses on stage at a prize-giving event at the hospital. Sat back in his chair on the stage where he collapsed and died of a massive heart attack. He was only 64. And this brought to an end almost 100 years of his family's leadership of local medical services. I guess that's ended the dynasty. Not quite the end of my story though. Having published Lionel's memoirs, I spoke to my friend David Rees, who owns a TV production company, Telescope, based in Swansea, and I wondered if she might be interested in producing a documentary on his life and achievements. I'm still trying to promote the story and get it out there to a wider audience. She had a look at books and thought we could do better. In 2016, Aileen and I were able to engage a friend of hers, a guy, Rob Gittins, who's a screenwriter and novelist whose CV includes writing for EastEnders, Casualty, The Bill, Emmerdale, many other programmes with which you'll be familiar. He's highly regarded scriptwriter. The charity funded Rob to develop an outline script for a 6-part TV series. 2018, that was 2016, it was commissioned. 2018, Rob finished it and produced the so-called series Bible. This outlined story based on the family and all the various stories, lines that we're familiar with through our research. We pitched this to all the main players, BBC, ITV, Netflix, Channels 4 and 5, Amazon. We went to them all, and they said, fantastic story, but it doesn't quite fit with our story, our portfolios. I've always suspected that BBC might have been interested if it wasn't for Call the Midwife. Kind of conflicting development of this has been a huge long burn, but it's now stalled. And we've come to the conclusion we can't sell it. It's white, male, Victorian, not very diverse, doesn't tick enough boxes these days. So Rob made a suggestion that it would be prudent if we tried to get a book, not like a historical novel written and out there to try and promote the story. And I'm pleased to say that the charity funded that. We have the author in the audience here tonight. And this is the book that has been written. It's virtually complete. We're hoping it will be launched in the town hall in Kidderminster in the Easter holiday next year. The book is based on the first two programmes of the TV series, so there's maybe 2 more books to come from that. And we're just waiting to firm up, hopefully with a high-profile person to launch the book. The series is going to be called, I guess from here, 27 Church Street. It couldn't be anything else really. The first book is called The Gathering Storm. You recall a picture of the family standing on Kate's golden wedding anniversary celebrations in the town hall, which I showed you earlier. Well, that's the point at which the story starts. So it's 1910 basically the storyline starts. And there's a lot of interweaving storylines. I haven't seen all the book yet. I've seen part of it, but I couldn't put it down. And our objective is to try and get that out, try and get it to be a bestseller, and that should be have some huge impact in raising the profile of the town. And there we are, I've got the picture again. So the hope is that once that reaches the profile, which we're hoping it will, that will then trigger some interest in the TV series. So I think we'll have got our full, if I can get a TV series out there, I can tick the final box to say that I promoted the reputation quite effectively. Okay, still not the end. I've got an 8th initiative, which is to install blue plaque on number 27. So Joseph Lister's got one. That's the one on there. Okay. Joseph Lister's. And these are the words which we're proposing to put on the blue plaque that is currently under design, and the Civic Society is in the process of processing that, and that will be implemented fairly soon, hopefully. Another 9th initiative, my wife Sarah and I were in the state. Oh, no, sorry, that's the next one. For some time, I've been in communication with a guy, Jason Simmons, who's the director of the Museum of Military Medicine, which was looking to rebuild itself in a new setting in Cardiff. And I was in touch with him, and he was very enthusiastic about having some aspects of Lionel's life included in that museum. Because after all, iodine was really significant. In the First World War, all the soldiers had a little file of iodine in their first aid kit. So very enthusiastic to have that. Unfortunately, COVID got in the way and all other things got in the way, so the Cardiff development has been cancelled, but they are going to reopen the facility in Whittington Barracks I think it's in Sussex somewhere. But so I'm keeping in touch with him. They're going through the process now of design. Yeah. One slide I was ahead. Sarah and I had a couple of days in Chester recently, and we stumbled across this museum. I don't know if any of you have been in there. It's a sort of medical history museum. And it's got several plaques outlining achievements of life, of medics and inventions and things. And you see that this one actually includes reference to Joseph Lister. There's no surprise that Lionel wasn't there. I was a bit disappointed with. So obviously we told them that they should be. And they're very grateful to get the information. Doubtful they'll be able to put anything physical in the museum, but they are promoting it on the website and the blogs, and then when they eventually get a chance to do something else, they will add his name into there. still a ton to do. I don't know if anybody's been in the old Operating Theatre Museum in London. I haven't managed to get to that yet, but I think that's another place where we ought to sort of target. And that's it. If you'd like a copy of the books, Sarah will be controlling them at the bottom back. Cheap price, £10 only each tonight, and the free booklet on the right there if you'd like to take one of those. And please be a little strip with the website on if you want to see much more information about the story